dishwasher, a cruel setup. Two young coworkers think he's too old, too quiet, too easy to frame. But what they don't know, the man they're mocking is being watched, and the one watching owns everything. The soft chime of the doorbell echoed as Ethan Caldwell stepped into Caldwell's Diner, the very first restaurant he had built from a shabby little shop 15 years ago. The smell of slightly burnt pancakes, the grease on the griddle, the clinking of glassware. These were familiar sounds he hadn't heard in a long time, buried beneath boardrooms, investors, and expansion blueprints. Ethan wore a faded flannel shirt, a worn baseball cap, and sported a 3-day stubble, perfectly blending in as an anonymous owner. At 45, he no longer needed to wipe tables or work the grill, but something had pulled him back, not to check the food quality, but to confirm a gut feeling that had been growing in him for the past 2 months. Reports said business at this Caldwell's Diner location was steady, customer flow consistent, but staff turnover had spiked unexpectedly. Operating costs seemed oddly inflated, and the most troubling part, a few long-time regulars had begun leaving subtle remarks about how the place didn't feel the same anymore. Ethan picked a seat at the counter, somewhere with a full view of the space without drawing attention. A young woman with light brown dyed hair and a name tag reading Chloe approached, not even glancing up as she spoke in mechanical tone. "What can I get you?" "Black coffee and grilled chicken sandwich," Ethan replied, lowering his voice to make it sound rougher. "Hey, quick question. How long's that old dishwasher been working here?" Chloe snorted softly and rolled her eyes toward the back kitchen, where an elderly man, thin, with white hair spiked from steam, was quietly scrubbing dishes. His rough hands moved quickly, even though his whole frame looked like it might give out. Him? Like forever. Clings to the place like he was born in it. Probably been here 10 years or more. She gave a dry laugh. "I swear he sleeps in that beat-up car out in the lot. Total old man weirdo." Ethan didn't respond. He simply watched the old man, Joseph Langston. There was something different about him. In a place running full tilt, Joseph moved slowly but purposefully. Like each plate he washed held a piece of dignity no one else here seemed to remember. A chuckle echoed behind the counter. Ethan turned slightly. A wiry young man with slick back hair, name tag Brandon, whispered something into Chloe's ear. They both looked at Joseph and laughed, not kindly. Ethan took a sip of his coffee. Bitter, but not because of the brew. He had come back at the right time. And he knew, if he wanted to understand what was truly going wrong at Caldwell's Diner, boardroom charts wouldn't help. He needed to be here, to listen, to watch with his own eyes. And what he saw first was a quiet gaze, buried beneath grease and steam, but still burning with decency that refused to die. Ethan took another sip of his coffee, his eyes still following Joseph, the man who, at his age, should have been resting with grandchildren, not hunched over a steaming sink in the back of a noisy kitchen. Amid the clatter of pots and pans, the rush of footsteps and the usual grumbles, Joseph was nearly invisible, except when someone needed the dirty dishes cleared or the floor wiped after a spill. He never complained, never snapped back. He just worked quietly. Whenever a customer came up short of the register, Joseph was the one who stepped forward. Never loud. He'd just pull a few crumpled bills, maybe $5, maybe just a handful of change, from his shirt pocket, hand them to Chloe or Brandon, then return to the dish pit like he'd never left. Again, Chloe muttered to Brandon, loud enough to be overheard. He must think he's some kind of secret hero. Brandon snorted. Yeah, secret hero with a busted-up car for a house. Dude acts like he's saving the world. Ethan didn't miss a word. And inside, something tightened. Joseph, oblivious, kept going. When a little girl dropped her orange juice, he was the one who grabbed a towel, stooping down with a soft smile like a kindly grandpa in an old movie. "No big deal, sweetheart. Just a little spill," he said gently, wiping up every drop like it was the most important task in the world. Another time, when an elderly man fumbled with his empty wallet and anxious eyes, Joseph didn't hesitate. He simply nodded at Chloe, pulled a few bills from his pocket, and handed them over. No words, no fuss. "That's the third time this week," Brandon whispered. "Guy's not just broke, he's dumb. Thinks this is a daytime drama or something." Chloe added with a sharp laugh. Ethan's grip tightened around the mug, not out of anger, but shame. These were his employees. This was his restaurant. The culture he'd once promised to build of respect, kindness, treating each other like family was cracking. And right here, under his roof, a man who had lost his wife, who slept in his car, whose back ached from labor, was being laughed at by the very people who should have been learning from him. Joseph turned slightly, rubbing the small of his back, just a simple motion, but enough to betray the pain that haunted him. Ethan exhaled slowly. He had come back at the right time. But the question was no longer, what's been going on? It was, what will I do to make it right? The afternoon at Caldwell's Diner passed in a facade of calm. Ethan remained at his familiar seat near the counter, head tilted toward a newspaper, but his ears stayed locked in the hushed conversation unfolding down the line, where Brandon and Chloe stood close, whispering just loud enough to catch his attention. "Sandra's checking the books more carefully now," Chloe muttered, glancing toward the manager's office. "If the register comes up short again, she'll have to act." Brandon chuckled under his breath. "All we need is for old man Joseph to be coincidentally near the register again and drop a few bills in like he always does. Problem solved." "This time, I'll make sure Sandra sees it," Chloe whispered. "Once Joseph's out, my aunt can take the shift, quick and clean, with a nice little referral bonus on top." Ethan could hardly believe what he was hearing. These two young employees, not only devoid of empathy, but shamelessly plotting to exploit Joseph's kindness and frame him as the scapegoat for their own scheme. "Did you see him yesterday?" Brandon snorted. "Drop $10 to cover that old lady's lunch. A few more weeks of this, and he won't have a cent left of his name." "Someone like that doesn't belong in a professional environment," Chloe added, her voice thick with fake concern. Ethan's grip tightened around his coffee mug. There was no doubt now. He was witnessing the moral decay festering inside the very model he once built. And these two weren't just a problem, they were a threat. Moments later, as if on cue, Ethan watched Chloe slip a receipt into the pocket of her apron. She then casually walked over to Sandra and announced, "The register's short again, I just finished counting." "How much?" Sandra asked, her brow furrowed. $40. Brandon chimed in. "Same as last Wednesday." Sandra turned her head toward the back, where Joseph was quietly wiping down the area around the coffee machine. Her expression flickered with suspicion. Joseph, unaware, simply nodded at a regular customer and returned to his work. Ethan watched the scene unfold, bitter but clear-eyed. He knew, if no one intervened, no one would stand up for Joseph, the man who lived with dignity while others exploited every inch of it. And Ethan knew one more thing. He wasn't going to let that happen. That evening, he didn't go straight home. Instead of going home, Ethan stopped by the company office, reopened the internal audit protocol, and submitted a special request: install hidden cameras with audio capture around the register area of Caldwell's Diner, starting the very next morning. Not just a monitor, but to expose. Ethan Caldwell returned to Caldwell's Diner the next day, dressed in his usual worn-out clothes and a low-brim cap hiding half his face, the same unassuming look he'd been wearing lately. But this time, he wasn't just observing. He was hunting for evidence. A discreetly disguised camera was now mounted beneath the cashier's counter, aimed directly at the register and service area. A microphone smaller than a dime was hidden inside a framed picture hanging behind the counter, right where Brandon and Chloe usually gathered to gossip, thinking no one could hear them. For the next 3 days, Ethan recorded everything with patience. Footage after peak hours showed Brandon deliberately miscounting change, while Chloe forgot to enter certain orders into the system, both manufacturing shortages. They whispered each other, as if scripting a play only they knew the ending to. But this time, Ethan was the one directing the stage. After hours, he didn't drive home. Instead, he tailed the beat-up old truck Joseph drove, a 1994 Chevrolet with faded paint and a duct-taped rear-view mirror. He kept a safe distance, careful not to be seen. Eventually, the truck turned into a gravel lot behind an industrial strip just blocks from the diner, where a line of aging trailers sat beneath the bare limbs of winter oaks. Joseph parked in front of a small steel trailer, rusted along one side, with a leaky roof patched with a tarp tied down by frayed rope. A dim light glowed from a single bulb hanging above the door. Ethan sat in his car, frozen. Moments later, the trailer door opened and a little girl, no more than 9, ran out to greet Joseph, her face lighting up despite the worn-out t-shirt hanging from her shoulders. "Grandpa, I finished my math homework," she shouted, throwing her arms around him. Joseph bent down, wincing slightly as he picked her up, doing his best to hide the pain in his back. His granddaughter, Ethan thought, and maybe the reason he keeps going every day. Through the trailer's small window, Ethan watched Joseph serve dinner. 2 bowls of instant noodles with a handful of boiled vegetables. The little girl ate happily, without a single complaint. After washing the dishes by hand under a dripping faucet, Joseph turned on a small space heater by the fold-out bed and read aloud to her from an old storybook, his voice calm and steady. Outside, the cold crept in, but inside that trailer, there was a world built from love, sacrifice, and quiet dignity. Ethan looked away, his eyes burning. What he had just witnessed wasn't merely a hard life. It was a remarkable heart, living for others, so quietly that it had been overlooked by everyone too self-absorbed to notice. "Joseph didn't steal a thing," Ethan whispered. "He's been giving more than anyone here ever has." And Ethan knew the moment of truth was near. That morning, the air inside Caldwell's diner buzzed with unusual energy. But only Ethan Caldwell knew the real reason why. Today, the disguised owner of the restaurant was about to flip the script. After days of surveillance, Ethan had seen enough. The moments when Joseph quietly pulled crumpled bills from his pocket to help struggling customers. The mocking behind his back. But what chilled Ethan to the bone was what he'd heard the night before, when Brandon whispered his plan to Chloe, a setup to frame Joseph for theft. "Tomorrow morning," Brandon murmured, "I'll pull $40 from the drawer early and leave it there just before Joseph walks out of the storeroom. Then I'll shout like I just found it missing." Chloe nodded. "I'll say I saw him near the register with a towel in his hand. We play it right, he's gone." They didn't just want Joseph fired. They wanted to replace him with Brandon's cousin, who'd been waiting for an opening for weeks. Ethan knew he couldn't stay silent. That morning, he restructured the game board. First, he sent Sandra, the morning shift manager, out with a fabricated, urgent meeting at the central branch. In her place, Linda, a longtime friend of Ethan and a senior manager in corporate, stepped in as acting supervisor. No one knew who she was. At exactly 10:30 a.m., Brandon and Chloe launched their performance. Brandon pretended to audit the cash drawer, then called out loudly, "Linda, we're missing $40. I just saw Joseph walk past the register less than a minute ago." Chloe jumped in without missing a beat, her voice trembling just enough. "I saw it too. He was holding a towel, standing right near the drawer. Maybe he took it by accident." The register area froze. A few waitstaff exchanged looks, some nodding as if they'd seen this moment coming. Linda, the temporary manager, kept her expression calm. "All right," she said, "let's call Mr. Joseph over for a quick word." Joseph emerged from the back, still drying his hands on a worn cloth. The moment he saw Brandon and Chloe, something flickered in his eyes. He seemed to know, but he walked over anyway. Linda asked gently, "Mr. Joseph, they say you were near the register a few minutes ago. Did you happen to see anything unusual?" Joseph shook his head, gaze steady. "I just went to grab a rag from the supply closet. I didn't go near the drawer." Chloe quickly cut in. "I'm certain," and Brandon saw him too. Brandon nodded quickly. "I swear, if you want, check the cameras. Although they've been broken for over a month." At that exact moment, the front doorbell chimed. Ethan stepped inside, removed his baseball cap, took off his glasses, and spoke in a low, commanding voice. "Unfortunately for you, the cameras aren't broken. I personally replaced them 3 days ago." The entire diner froze. "And not just the cameras," Ethan continued. "I also have a full audio recording of your conversation last night. Every single word." Chloe went pale. Brandon took a step back, stammering. We were just..." Ethan cut him off. "Yes, just trying to destroy the reputation of a man who's quietly helped customers and staff here for the past 7 years." The air inside Caldwell's diner grew suffocating with tension. Ethan turned toward Joseph and gave him a respectful nod. "We'll talk privately soon, Mr. Joseph. But for now, Linda, would you call the police, please?" Linda nodded silently. Ethan looked back at Brandon and Chloe, who now stood trembling like leaves in a storm. "This game," he said slowly, "is over, and you played yourselves right into checkmate." Silence blanketed the diner. Brandon stood frozen, his face drained of color. Chloe forced a nervous smile, but the panic in her eyes betrayed her instantly. No one moved. The only sound was a spoon clinking softly against a ceramic mug in the far corner. Ethan stepped forward, pulled a USB drive from his pocket, and plugged it into the large TV screen mounted above the counter. The monitor lit up with crisp surveillance footage. There was Brandon, clearly reaching into the cash drawer and stuffing bills into his apron when no one was watching. Chloe hovered nearby, keeping lookout, glancing around anxiously. In another clip, they were shown whispering, plotting how to make Joseph look guilty. Then came a different clip. Joseph, quietly pulling out his own wallet to cover the bill for a teenage boy whose card had been declined. Another employee, a waitress named Lisa, stood beside him, witnessing the act with silent awe. Whispers began spreading through the diner. A woman near the window leaned toward her friend and murmured, "Oh my God." All those times I thought Mr. Joseph was taking money from the till. He was covering what others couldn't pay. Sandra, the manager who had just returned from the branch meeting, stepped forward, visibly stunned. "Ethan, this whole thing..." Ethan turned to her, his voice calm but resolute. "I know you weren't involved, Sandra, but from this day forward, everything at Caldwell's Diner is going to change." Brandon shot up from his seat. "We were just trying to help the company save money. He's too old. He's not efficient anymore." Ethan looked straight at him, eyes sharp as steel. "Efficient? What about loyalty, kindness, and the dignity of the man you try to destroy?" Chloe looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. She bowed her head, mumbling, "We didn't think we'd get caught." Ethan didn't need to say another word. One of the two local officers, called in by Linda, entered the diner at that exact moment. Brandon Reyes, Chloe Maddox. The officer said clearly, "You are being taken into custody for internal fraud and attempted defamation." The cold click of the handcuffs locking into place echoed through the room. Customers burst into applause, not out of spite, but in relief. Justice had finally been served, right there in the place where quiet injustice had once taken root. Joseph remained in the dishwashing corner, still holding a damp towel. His head was bowed, not in shame, but from unfamiliarity with being the center of attention. Ethan walked over to him and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "Mr. Joseph," Ethan said softly, "you've been silent long enough. It's time everyone knows who you really are." Joseph looked up, eyes glassy but unbroken. "I just did what I thought was right, Mr. Caldwell. That's all." Ethan smiled. And that's exactly why Caldwell's Diner is still standing today. As the door shut behind Brandon and Chloe, the room erupted into thunderous applause. Not for punishment, but for recognition. For a man who had sacrificed in silence, day after day, Joseph Langston. Ethan turned to face the staff and customers. His voice wasn't loud, but every word rang with clarity and weight. Justice was served today. But if we let it end here, we haven't learned anything. Sandra stepped forward, her face still pale with realization. "I didn't know it had gotten this bad. Ethan, I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." Ethan nodded, his tone softer. "This wasn't just your failure. It was the system's, mine included, for being away from this place too long." At that moment, the diner door swung open again. A group of high school students walked in, chalk dust still clinging to their uniforms. Leading them was a boy named Mason, the same boy Joseph had quietly helped pay for lunch that day. Mason walked confidently to the center of the room, carrying a shoebox covered in handwritten signatures. "Mr. Joseph," Mason spoke up, his eyes shining. "We went around the school telling everyone your story. Everyone, students and teachers, was moved. This is the money we raised to help you fix your trailer." The diner fell silent. Joseph's hands trembled as he accepted the shoebox, then looked inside. Crumpled $5s and $10s, loose change, and a small handwritten note that read, "We want you to know you are not invisible." The entire diner stood up. A few employees clapped him on the shoulder. One woman dabbed her eyes with a napkin. Ethan leaned toward Patricia and whispered, This is why I started Caldwell's Diner." Ethan turned back, stepped onto a stool near the counter so everyone could see him clearly. "Starting tomorrow," he declared, "Joseph Langston will no longer be our dishwasher." Every head turned. "He will be our honorary manager across the Caldwell's Diner network, not to handle heavy tasks, but to protect what matters most, human kindness." Joseph froze. Another round of applause erupted. This time, it was the sound of restored belief. Sandra turned to Joseph, smiling through tears. "Would you accept this position, Mr. Langston?" Joseph gently placed a donation box on the counter and lifted his head. No longer the man hidden behind steam and soap, but the symbol of a forgotten kind of goodness. "I don't need to do much," he said, voice steady. "Just help everyone here remember. Sometimes, helping someone is as simple as a warm plate, a kind word, or standing up when no one else will." That morning, the sunlight filtering through Caldwell's Diner was soft and golden. The doors open as usual, but nothing about today felt like any day before. There was a quiet buzz in the air, a sense that something meaningful was about to happen. Staff lined up near the counter, and customers, many who had witnessed yesterday's events, filled the booths, eyes fixed on the silver-haired man quietly wiping plates in the back. Joseph Langston. Ethan Caldwell stepped out from the small office in the rear, holding a folder and a sealed envelope. Gone was the baseball cap and old flannel. Today, he wore a crisp white shirt, simple but dignified. All eyes turned toward him as he walked over to Joseph. "Joseph," Ethan said, voice warm and steady, "I need you to come up here with me for a moment." Joseph wiped his hands on a faded towel, hesitating, eyes scanning the room. But Ethan nodded reassuringly, and he stepped slowly into the center of the diner. "I used to think I was a good boss," Ethan began. "But what I've seen these past few days has taught me something important, that I've been missing the most valuable part of this place. People like you, Joseph. The quiet ones who carry not just the workload, but the dignity of this place on their shoulders." The room fell completely silent. "Therefore," Ethan continued, opening the envelope, "I hereby declare, as of today, Joseph Langston is officially the honorary manager of Caldwell's Diner. He will no longer be washing dishes alone after night shifts. This comes with a full salary, full benefits, and most importantly, he held up a key. This is a key to a house 3 blocks from here. This house belongs to you and your granddaughter. No rent, no mortgage. It's yours, a reward long overdue." Joseph stood frozen. The room erupted into thunderous applause. Some of the younger staff wiped away tears. But Ethan wasn't finished. "I've also contacted the hospital," Ethan added, "to pay off the remainder of your medical debt, funded through the newly established Joseph Lawson Fund, created just last night." Joseph brought a hand to his mouth, fighting back emotion. Ethan stepped closer. Speaking in a low voice meant only for him. "And one more thing, I called your daughter in Seattle, Rachel Langston. She'll be flying in with your granddaughter this weekend." Tears finally broke free from Joseph's eyes. He reached for Ethan's hand and gripped it tight, unable to speak. It was a simple moment, yet deeply moving, a testament to one enduring truth. Kindness is never wasted. That day, the entire Caldwell's Diner didn't just witness a restoration of dignity. They witnessed a rebirth of a man, of a community, of a dream where justice doesn't have to be loud, only human. The next morning, under the soft light of Rivertown's early sun, the warmth inside Caldwell's Diner had not faded. The story of Joseph Langston had spread throughout the city overnight. The local newspaper ran a full-page photo of him, captioned in bold, "The dishwasher who taught a business what dignity means." But for Ethan Caldwell, it couldn't stop at headlines or handshakes. He knew he had work to do, not just to make things right, but to set a precedent. That a great company doesn't start with profit margins. It starts with people. At a company-wide meeting that morning, representatives from all 4 Caldwell's Diner branches gathered in a modest hall behind the flagship location. Ethan stepped up to the podium. He didn't bring revenue charts or expansion plans, only a printed document and a heart full of resolve. "I stand here today," Ethan began, "not just as the founder of Caldwell's Diner, but as someone who was awakened by a dishwasher. Joseph Langston didn't just restore faith in this company. He reminded me that core values don't belong on the wall. They belong in our actions." The room remained still, focused. That's why, as of today, I am announcing a system-wide reform program. Every eye locked on him. First, Ethan declared, his voice firm, every employee at Caldwell's Diner, regardless of branch, will now receive a minimum wage of $22 per hour, effective immediately. No more working full-time and still struggling to survive. A few gasps echoed to the room. A young server in the back nearly broke into tears. Second, every employee will be granted full health insurance coverage, no exceptions based on role, age, or time served. And finally, Ethan said, opening a new folder, "I'd like to introduce the Joseph Lawson Fund, named after a man to whom we all owe more than just gratitude. This fund will be annually financed by 5% of our company's net profits and will support employees in hardship, cover meals for customers unable to pay, and provide scholarships for our workers' children." The room erupted, but Ethan raised his hand for silence. "This is not charity," he said softly but powerfully. "This is justice. This is how we build a place where everyone can walk into work with their head held high." Joseph, sitting in the front row, lowered his head quietly, eyes glistening. He had never asked for anything, but that day he received everything because of the quiet kindness he had always given without question. This was no longer Caldwell's Diner. This was Caldwell's family. And in a family, no one gets left behind. Even after being named honorary manager and gifted a comfortable, debt-free home, Joseph Langston still showed up to Caldwell's Diner every morning. His apron, clean and neatly folded, hung over his shoulder. His warm smile, marked by the years, was still the first thing staff and customers saw when they walked in. He didn't have to wash dishes anymore, unless he wanted to, but he still stood in the kitchen during rush hours, helping out when needed, mentoring young staff, reminding them to check oven temps, dry the floors, and greet regulars by name. "I don't get why you still come in every day," a new teenage employee once asked. Joseph simply smiled, adjusted his well-worn cap, and said, "Because this place isn't just a job. It's where I remember I still have something to give." Since Ethan Caldwell's sweeping reforms, not just the staff, but the entire community of Fairgrove began to see Caldwell's Diner differently. People didn't just come for the best meatloaf in Illinois anymore. They came for something more rare, to feel seen, heard, and welcomed. The Joseph Lawson Fund helped pay for heart surgery for a little girl, covered rent for a line cook after an accident, and awarded a full college scholarship to the son of a longtime busser. In small things, like Joseph preparing a hot plate for a delivery driver who always ran late, or writing handwritten birthday notes for every worker on shift, a culture had been reborn, a culture of unconditional kindness. The media took notice, calling Caldwell's Diner a national case study in human-centered business. Articles titled, "From Dishwasher to Living Legacy," appeared in print and online. Joseph was invited to speak at business culture conferences across the Midwest, though he always politely declined, saying with a shy grin, "I don't speak like Ethan, but I know how to listen." And what about Ethan Caldwell? He just sat quietly at the counter, occasionally sipping his black coffee, watching Joseph patiently show a young employee how to clean the stove without scratching the stainless steel. He knew then, greatness doesn't shine in the spotlight. It lives in quiet, consistent acts by people like Joseph. And so it was that Joseph Langston, a man who once slept in an old car behind the diner, became the living legacy of Caldwell's Diner. Not because he rose to a higher position, but because he never walked away from the lowest one. He stood tall there, with dignity, with heart. And in Fairgrove, the story of the dishwasher who taught a whole town what character really means will be told for generations to come.